Here Comes Pod has got a new partner. We've teamed up with TV industry Bible C21. Now, we all know there are a lot of outlets for news about the international TV world, but I have to say C21 is the first place I look, and I'm delighted that they're supporting Here Comes Pod. From the favelas of Brazil to the millionaire apartments of Monaco, the drama of sport is a global phenomenon, and there's no one better at capturing that passion and excitement than this week's guest, James Gay-Rees. James's documentary features on iconic stars like Senna, Maradona and Amy Winehouse brought critical acclaim and commercial success. His work in pioneering the access sports documentary format has pulled back the curtain on sports as diverse as cycling, rugby, tennis, golf and surfing, and has helped to transform the global appeal of Formula One through the Netflix show Drive to Survive. So please take your place on the grid as we hear from the man in pole position in sports documentary making, James Gay-Rees. Ladies and gentlemen, please start your engines and enjoy the ride. Hi James, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
Absolute pleasure on my side. I always like to start with a fun question, which is, in this case, in the classic TV series Superstars,
Yep.
some of the greatest sports stars of the era competed against each other to see who the best athlete was amongst them. Now, if you could put together a Superstars show for the current era, from athletes from the history of sport to the present day, so you can pick anybody that you want, which 5 sports stars would you choose to compete in that event?
That is a good question. I think we are trying to put together a modern day sports star show, by the way, so it's totally on point. It's a very good question. I'd have to have Jude Bellingham because he's just tearing it up at the moment. Ben Stokes would also be there. I'd have to have a rugby player. So I'm going to go for the young Wales captain, Dafford Jenkins, I think he's called. I'd have a boxer.
What about one from the history of boxing rather than just contemporary?
History of boxing, easy. Prime Mike Tyson, just for a bit of fun. And what else? Let's have a runner. Let's have a long. Oh, no. Tell you what, Daley Thompson, as
Well,
a tribute, also the original superstars.
Yes, absolutely. That would be a fiery mix, I think, with Daley Thompson and Mike Tyson in particular. So that obviously is linked to all the work that you've done, both in TV and in sports specifically. But just looking through the notes, after university, your first job was working for Arthur Andersen, I believe. So when did a career in the creative industries become a path that you wanted to pursue, and how did you make that move, which I think was into the maelstrom that was Miramax in the 90s?
I probably made that move because the pathway through the financial services sector was going to be rather bumpy and not necessarily a straight line. So, yeah, I was advised by. So I did economics and accountancy at university, and I went out with this lovely girl for a long time called Justine Frischmann, who then went on to become the lead singer of a very famous band called Elastica. And her brother sagely told me that I should do an accountancy degree because that was the best way into corporate finance. So being somebody who's terrible at maths and numbers in general, for some reason, I really took his advice very seriously and did economics and accountancy at university. And then, lo and behold, I ended up at Arthur Andersen, failed my part twos in spectacular fashion, and then just had my heart set on going to the movie business. Primarily because my stepfather was Mel Smith, the actor and director and comedian, and we would sit up late at night. He would show me all these great movies from the 70s. And I became completely obsessed with movies from the 70s and still am, really, to this day. And so I then just got my heart set on the movies in a really irrational, sort of, uneducated kind of way. I didn't go to film school or anything, but I did get a job as an intern at Miramax in New York for 3 days a week. And that's where it all started, really. And it was an incredible experience. I was living in New York, sleeping on somebody's floor, surviving off two slices of pizza a day for about a year. So it was a fun time.
And I guess it was a bit of a maelstrom. In terms of the creativity, was that a great grounding for everything that you've done later on?
He was making some, he was releasing lots of very seminal movies back in those days, and he released a really good documentary called Paris is Burning about the voguing scene in New York, and then he also did Truth or Dare, the Madonna documentary while I was there, as well as obviously loads of dramas. Peter Greenaway's Drowning by Numbers, I think. Listen, working there in those days was like a crash course. I was working for a small offshoot called Prestige at the time, which did all those documentaries. And I had a great time actually because it was just like a team of 10 people releasing these films, and so it's all the marketing, the distribution, the cinema booking, and it was a midtown New York. It was super atmospheric, but it's crazy in those days because Harvey, if he had a cash flow problem, he'd just fire everybody, and then he'd rehire them a week later just to save like a week's cash flow, which obviously I don't think you could probably do now. But yeah, he wasn't too worried about employment laws.
And then I think you headed out to LA at some point.
Yeah, I felt the pull of LA. I think I was kind of done with New York. I did a year in New York and I was like, I need some sunshine and I need to calm down a little bit because I had a little bit too much fun in New York. So I had lots of friends in LA. So I went over to stay with some pals over there, French guy and an American producer who let me have a sofa to sleep on for a bit. And this producer had a sort of semi-official deal on a lot at Paramount. Wasn't really that clear exactly how it worked, but he had offices on the Paramount lot. And I just joined as a kind of like development monkey. I was just reading scripts, making tea, loving life actually. Bought a big, 1969 Lincoln Continental, and ended up, renting a little house in the hills with some friends, and some lots of friends from London came over. It's a really great moment actually. We had such a great time. I'm still friends with a lot of those people today, actually. And I've still got lots of friends in Los Angeles from them. So it was a very formative time. I was there for about 5 or 6 years.
And at what point did you decide to pursue a career in documentary production? And how did you actually put together your first documentary feature, Exit Through the Gift Shop?
It was kind of Exit and Senna kind of happened simultaneously. It was a really, really strange sequence of events, actually. I'd come back to the UK by now because my ex-wife was here and, we probably looked like we were going to start a family. And I came back to the UK and my stepfather, Mel, had just he just made Bean at that point in time, which had been a big hit, the first Bean movie with Rowan Atkinson. And I went over to Tim Bevan, the film producer who had made the film, and said, you should give us a first look deal. We'd be great. We could kind of do funny comedies for you. We'll kind of like, we know loads of great writers, give us a first look. And to my surprise, they did. So we had this tiny office on Berwick Street above a tailor, literally one room. I couldn't believe it. I sort of had a little assistant and I had a little bit of development money from working title. And so I was trying to develop scripts and I made one or two. I made a teen horror, like the first UK teen horror in years at that time for Universal called Long Time Dead with my friend Marcus, who's still a great friend of mine, directing it. He's got a shark movie out on Netflix at the moment, actually. So he's still playing that furrow. And then I made another movie called Black Bull, which went into turnaround and I made with Icon at the time when they were here back in the day, which is a good little movie, actually. Had Vince Vaughn in it and Paul Kay. It was a funny cast, Lucy Punch. But I had this kind of weird itch to make documentaries. I don't really know where it really came from. I think the first sort of trigger point was the fact that I was down in the countryside one day and I was reading this article about the 10th anniversary of Ayrton Senna's death. I was like, my dad used to know that guy, Ayrton Senna, the racing driver. I'm sure of it. And I spoke to him and I was like, you knew Senna, didn't you? And he's like, yeah, yeah. I used to do the John Player special campaigns with him after Grand Prix. They were like still photo campaigns. And I then it all started coming back to me. I'd been living in Los Angeles when Ayrton had died in 94, I think. And I remember ringing my dad at the time going, hey, that crazy racing driver that you used to kind of have near religious thoughts about has died, at the Grand Prix in Imola in Italy. And he's like, yeah, I can't believe it. He was too good. He kind of crashed. It must be something funny must have happened to his car. And there was a lot of conjecture around Senna's death, obviously. Anyway, reading this article by Simon Barnes in the Times 10 years later captured a lot and reflected a lot of what my dad had said about Senna, his sort of almost mystical qualities and how he could be infuriating, but when you were in his presence, you felt like you were in the presence of some other sort of being because he was so intense and so sort of thoughtful. And then obviously such an amazing driver and seemed to be just marching to the beat of a different drum. Anyway, I got slightly obsessed with the idea of making a documentary about him because there'd been a few biopics at that time or were being made. And I think, I can't remember exactly the timeline, but, Will Smith was playing Ali. And I was like, he's good, but he's not Ali. I mean, who can be Ali? What's the point, really? So I decided to try and make a documentary about Senna. And that took 7 years of getting permission from the family and Bernie Eccleston and all that stuff. So that was a absolute battle. But simultaneously, my old flatmate from Los Angeles, Holly Cushing Ashwell, she'd left LA before me, gone back, was working in an art gallery in London. And that art gallery was looking after Banksy. It was the Larazides Gallery, which is, I'm not sure if it's still going. Anyway, she was looking after Banksy. She and Banksy had left the gallery. She was now his manager. And she said to me, we want to make a documentary about street art. I said, okay, fine. What's the story? She said, oh, we just got all this footage from this crazy French guy. We're going to make a documentary. How should we finance it? I said, well, you guys can finance it. Channel 4 probably finance it. Or I can try and help you raise the money. So she's like, no, 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 don't worry. We'll finance it. We'll get on with it. And then about 6 months later, she was like, I don't know what this thing is we've created. We stumbled into this really, really weird world of street art. And there's these strange characters. And the story's taking a really strange turn. Can I show it to you? So I ended up watching a very rough cut at this company called Keo Films in Clerkenwell, which is they're our neighbours now, funny enough. And I just didn't know what to make of this rough cut. It was a very strange film. I thought it was going to be about Banksy, but it ended up being about this French street artist called Mr. Brainwash, who clearly hadn't got a bloody clue what he was doing. But he'd sort of been told by Banksy, here are the 10 things you need to do if you want to be a successful street artist. And he thought he'd been spoken to by God. It was hysterical. So he went at it with real vim and vigor. And the film's about how he becomes this kind of massive overnight sensation. And I was in LA the other day. He's still got a gallery in Los Angeles. I mean, the mind boggles the amount of suckers out there. Not because to many people's thinking, as many people think, he was a Banksy construct, just because he's not the best artist in the world. So I think he outgrosses Banksy now, which is kind of extraordinary. Maybe he can't, but he's definitely managed to have a career. So I don't know if you've seen the film, but everybody thinks the film is a red herring, but it's not. It's all exactly as stated.
And the film was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature.
Yeah,
Did you go to the Oscar ceremony, and how did the experience compare to your expectations?
I did go to the Oscar ceremony actually. I was sitting next to a friend of mine who was at the time John Sloss's partner. What's his name? He's a very big agent. Really nice guy. I can't remember his name. It was really good. We were really high up in the gods. I think I'd had a very late night the night before with the gang and the whole Banksy crew. I think we were sort of a little bit overexcited the night before the Oscars. I think I might have found it quite a long, arduous ceremony. We didn't win, but we were like, there were about 6 in-show gags about Banksy. So, we were the talk of the town. And then we had an amazing party afterwards in the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, which I managed to recover for. So yeah, it was an incredibly fun time in life. I mean, the film was so anarchic, and it started well because basically we'd taken the film to Sundance, where it got this like rapturous reception. And as you drove into Sundance, into Park City, Banksy had just done all these amazing pieces by the side of the road, and then he painted all in Park City itself. And everybody thought everybody was Banksy. Like if you had an English accent, people were like, "It's Banksy." I mean, people even thought I was Banksy. It was hysterical. And I didn't necessarily disabuse him of that for a while because it just you know, the girls wanted to talk to me. It was great. So it was fun. It was a real riot actually. Releasing that experience, having that experience, and releasing that film as we did in a DIY style. We did it all ourselves with John Sloss. Was a really incredible experience, and that's how it should be done. Do it yourself. Get out there. Book cinemas.
Next came Senna, which you mentioned earlier, which was BAFTA winning, and that was 2010. You talked about what excited you about the project and the connection to the material and to Senna, but how did you connect with the director, Asif Kapadia, who you went on to work with on the Oscar-winning Amy in 2015 and also later Diego Maradona in 2019?
Yeah, I've known Asif for years actually because it's amazing how these things are all connected. Mel Smith, my stepfather, used to have a commercials production company called Smith, Jones, Brown and Cassie. And Asif was a director there when he came out of film school. And obviously, because he made an amazing first feature called Warrior back in the day. So he was already on the sort of movie path. So he didn't do that many commercials for the company, I don't think. But I knew Asif from then, really liked him. And then we had a Brazilian director, Jose Padilla, who was attached to Senna to begin with, who then became very famous for some, I can't remember the name of his film, but he did a great documentary called Bus 174, I think. And then he made lots of big hit Brazilian movies later and TV shows. I think he's a very successful director now. Anyway, he and his producing team came on board. We thought this is great. We've got a really hot Brazilian director. He was really keen to do it. We took him to meet the family. I thought the family liked him. And then they very unceremoniously called me 2 days later and said, he's not going to direct this film for whatever reason. Brazil's run by like a handful of families, and I think there was something. Anyway, long story short, I need a new director. I was going through a list of names with my executive producer, stroke writer, Manish Pandey, who I'd met through Working Title, who was like the world's greatest Senna expert. And we were both fans of The Warrior. So we just interviewed Asif. He wasn't really into Formula One, which was good. Didn't know much about Senna, which was good. And yeah, we just got on together. And then, as you say, we had a great time making a bunch of films together.
And what are the skills and attributes that you look for in the directors that you work with?
It really depends on the type of film. I mean, there's a huge difference between being a showrunner on something like Drive to Survive and being a director on something like Senna. One's all archive based for a start. So you've got to have enormous patience and pile through thousands of hours of archive. I think 5,000 hours of footage on Senna and 5,000 hours of footage on Maradona. It's crazy. So if they in that particular situation, you've got to be able to. It's like detective work making those the Amy's and the Sennas because it's like investigation. You're trying to investigate, especially something like Amy, what happened. Really in that film, it was almost journalistic in a sense. And we interviewed over 100 people for that film, some of them over 5 times, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of interview footage. And then you're just creating this huge sort of patchwork quilt, mosaic, if you like, of bits of footage. Because obviously we don't, in those films back in the day, we didn't have voiceover or talking heads. So, you've got to do it all in the moment through archive, which is incredibly painstaking and time consuming, but really gratifying, I think, when you see the end product, hopefully. So yeah, it's just somebody patience, somebody who's really good with people, somebody who's not afraid to ask the difficult questions, and somebody who can take on some big characters. I mean, we had to take on Mitch Winehouse, who was a large character, and we had to sort of take on Diego Maradona in his own way. Do you know what I mean? And then, we worked very closely with the Senna family, but they're a very powerful family in Brazil. And, they did let us make the film we wanted to make by and large. But, you've got to manage these very key relationships. And everybody thinks that their story is the only version of the story that's right. And they're all at odds with each other. So, especially on a film like Amy, we're like, oh my God, this is such a tragic, dark film or situation. We're not sure who we can believe because everybody's trying to slightly absolve themselves of responsibility. So that was a particularly tricky process, as you can imagine.
What are the key elements of success for a documentary feature, both creatively and commercially?
Well, they're sort of linked, aren't they? I suppose. I mean, if it's creatively successful, then the chances are it'll find an audience. I think because I wouldn't say there's like a vast amount of brilliant documentaries being made at the moment. I don't. I'm a little bit out of the loop. Some of my friends are still making great docs. Matt Heineman is obviously still making great documentaries. I'm sure Asif is still making great documentaries. James Rogan's still making great stuff. There are great people out there. Sam Blair's making great stuff. That's just my little gang. But I think you really need to say something unique today. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but there's a lot of repetitive behavior, I think, in some facets of the documentary world. I mean, listen, Netflix has changed things in the sense that, it's one of the biggest buyers of documentaries now, but it knows very clearly what it wants. And listen, we make a lot of stuff on Netflix and we're very grateful for that. But, I think whether it's true crime, it's gone into buckets a bit more. And obviously there are lots of people making their, altruism, I guess, making films about subjects they're very personal to them and care about outside of those traditional buckets, whether it's music films or, true crime, exposés or celebrity pieces. Um, I still think that, and there's something I'm working on with one of those directors I mentioned just now. Somebody's got to make the right film that really finds the right audience today, that says something that needs to be said, and that could touch upon the environmental situation, could touch upon the political situation, could touch upon the bigger picture. Where's it all going? And I think that it's a big question, obviously, but I certainly feel compelled to try and have another go at making something which could say something about the state of the media. I mean, Amy said something about the state of media in this country, I think, and the nature of celebrity and stuff, and shone a light on certain aspects of that. But, I love making my stuff that I make at the moment. And, we go into everything with real commitment and gusto and passion. But I still like to find, and I'm going to take my time over it with this director in mind. I'm still going to try to find that film, which may be impossible to finance because it won't necessarily be that commercial, but it adds something meaningful to the conversation because I think the market's been pulled in one direction, and I think that there needs to be a response to that to some extent. And obviously, as you can tell, I'm being very oblique because I don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to try and find it with this friend of mine and see where we get to.
But actually, the worlds of sport and music have probably, so far anyway, dominated the films that you produce. Do you think the subject matter for these films, being sport and music, is there something about the stars that inhabit that world that elevates them in the documentary universe?
Well, listen, I think sport's a gift because listen, I love sport in the round anyway. Do you know what I mean? There aren't many sports that I don't follow. So to work in sport for me is a real privilege and a pleasure. So I'm really not moaning about that with my previous point at all. There's two sides of my brain almost when it comes to this kind of stuff. And I think the sport is just it's pure drama. That's why people watch. Live sport is still the centerpiece of most schedules. Do you know what I mean? For a reason, because it is just it's never-ending drama. You never know what's going to happen. And there aren't many things in life that you can say that about. And nobody gets, I mean, people get hurt, but nobody dies in the, do you know what I mean? So the stakes are relatively low, but you have this enormous personal investment with it a lot of the time for various reasons. And it means a lot to people. And that's a perfect combination in many ways. And it's, athletic and it's kind of dynamic. And that's why we love making our shows because obviously there's the broadcast show that's out there that, everybody can see. But I think modern audiences are desperate to see behind the curtain. They want to know what it takes to be an elite sportsman or woman. They want to know what goes into the process. They want to know what their vulnerabilities are because they all look like superhumans. Do they have trouble sleeping? Is their marriage happy? Do they have kids? They're human. They need to be able to relate to them in a way that they haven't been able to in the past, I think. And I think some of the shows that we make help that, and you could say the same about Senna, you kind of got inside that guy's head and understood him a bit more because he was a very, very driven, slightly maniacal character. And, I think he was misunderstood. So it's when you can change people's perceptions about sport, I think, or musicians for that matter. But music doesn't inherently have the same amount of drama in it, apart from a very unfortunate occasion like, Amy and what happened to her. But by and large, bands get together. If they're lucky, they have a bit of success, and then they tend to break up. Do you know what I mean? It's not inherently dramatic. Putting on a gig, we've been offered, do you want to do the Drive to Survive of Coachella? It's like, well, it's just about are they going to get on stage on time? Do you know what I mean? It's not really the stakes aren't that high. I mean, they are for the audience of the band in terms of performance, but it's a different bag. So anyway, sport just is an incredibly enduring, compelling arena. And I don't think that's ever going to change. I mean, people keep on predicting the demise of our sports access shows, but I think the trains have cessation. I mean, I'm not saying that they won't evolve as in the way they're made, but I think people are going to continue to be fascinated with behind the scenes. I don't think that's going to go away anymore.
All of the aforementioned features were theatrically released, as if we're just focusing on the
Yeah.
feature film side. Can documentary features still sustain a theatrical release process, or do you think they're increasingly now the domain of the streaming services and select pay TV broadcasters?
I'm missing increasingly they are, I think. There are certainly films getting theatrical releases. Sometimes it's part of the deal with Netflix that you have a short window so you can qualify for this and that. I think there has to be a place for them in cinemas. And the one that I'm talking about doing, the world's greatest documentary ever made, by James Gay-Rees and his magical film director. That's going to be cinemas only. That's part of the point of that exercise, that, you have to see it on the big screen. And I think there's still a really big audience for that. I bumped into Tom Quinn, who runs Neon in Las Vegas at the Grand Prix the other day, and he wanted to release Senna because it's the 30th anniversary of Senna's death this year. He wanted to do a big theatrical release in the States, and Universal annoyingly won't sell it to him or lease it him, license it to him to do that. So he clearly feels there's a market for those kind of films still theatrically.
So in 2019, the world of streaming came, and we've talked about that in various guises, but it came calling for you and your partner, Paul Martin, at Box to Box with F1 Drive to Survive. So we've touched on that. How did the project come about, and what was the initial reaction from the teams and the drivers?
Yeah, so I'd obviously made Senna by this point in time, which, a lot of people were fans of, thankfully. And Paul and I just started Box to Box, and we were at a CAA sports marketing or networking event in London. London, actually, ironically, we're with CAA now, but so we were at this networking event, kicking our heels. I think we met Jose Mourinho, and I got a bit tongue-tied and starstruck, and we talked about Senna briefly, and he'd enjoyed that. And the Red Bull Formula One marketing team were there, and I met a really nice guy called Dom, who was the sort of head of comms at the time. And I said, "Hey, what do you do?" And he was like, "Oh, I do the marketing for Red Bull Formula One team." And I was like, "Oh, wow, I made Senna." He's like, "Oh, we've been wanting to make a documentary for ages about the behind the scenes of the team. We'd love to have a chat." Anyway, we got really excited. We worked up a deck. Formula One has been bought by Liberty Media, and they'd brought in a guy called Sean Bratches from ESPN to run the sort of, the media side of things. So we went to see this great guy called Sean, who's become a fast friend of ours now, and really one of the great guys from on American soil. And he said, "Listen, we like your deck, we like your tape. It's great. Rebel's a great team, but we're already quite a long the way down the line with Netflix about doing a TV show about the whole sport. You can get involved in that if you want." And we were like, "Really? That sounds like a massive undertaking." And then the Netflix executive Nat had sort of been reaching out to us almost simultaneously. We knew the guys from Formula One from making Senna, Ian Holmes over there, who's become a great pal of mine as well. And he's an executive producer on Drive to Survive now. And we got together and decided we were going to do it. And we just set off basically. I went to a bunch of Grand Prix in the kind of season before, met lots of team principals, tried to explain to them what we were going to do, not really knowing anything about how to shoot a 10-part series or making an access show because I'd never made one before. And Paul and I just went around the paddock just trying to pretend like we knew what we were talking about, and sort of, they didn't pay much attention to us. I mean, we didn't have Mercedes and Ferrari in the first series because they were just a bit skeptical. And I think they wanted to do their own shows at that point in time. So we just got on with it. And with great characters like Gunter were really supportive, bless him, and became a mainstay of the show. And we just sort of made it up as we went along. But the good thing about it was that Nat over at Netflix did know how to make shows like this. So he really taught us what the process was. We just got stuck in. And yeah, we're about to start. Well, we have started season seven. Sorry, season seven. So it's been a crash course in it, and we're now thinking of ways to refresh the show. Just finished. We just locked production on season six, which I'm very pleased with. Saw the teaser yesterday. So yeah, it's been a massive learning curve, and obviously it's been great because it's led to a ton of other business.
And the logistical challenge of filming that show must be immense.
It is. I mean, that circuit is brutal. I mean, our poor old crew, gets battered every year. But they have a great time, but it's a lot of traveling, obviously. I couldn't do it. I'm too old. So they run around cultivating these relationships, trying to get access to drivers and teams, and then we try to make it all work in the edit. But it's really good fun still. I love going to, I'll probably go to half a dozen Grand Prix a year. It's great fun. I've known a lot of people in the paddock for a long time. And yeah, it's been a great experience for everybody. We've helped to put the sport back on the map. They've got a lot of money pouring into the sport, I think, as a result. And
Has that been a big surprise, the reaction and the scale of the reaction to the show?
I think so. I don't think you could really see it coming. I mean, I think that I don't think it's necessarily entirely fair to say it was male, pale, and stale before we came along, but I don't think audiences were growing particularly, and they've definitely grown in the States a lot. And the demographic has really, got younger, which is obviously what they wanted. So it's been pretty transformative, I think.
And I think you touched on this earlier that the inherent drama of sport in general is one of the reasons why sports documentaries have become so fascinating alongside obviously the live rights. And there seem to be particularly strong personalities and rivalries in F1. Was it a conscious decision to elevate those elements? And how does that process work when you're working in sports that have more of a team dynamic and sports when you have quite individualistic, inherently individualistic approaches to things like golf and tennis, which you've done as well?
I mean, you'd think they were wildly different, but they're not in a way because, I mean, Formula One is a gift in a way because the precinct, which is that paddock, picks up, puts down 3 days, 4 days, whatever, picks up, puts down. You know where everybody's going to be standing every weekend. It's like it's totally predetermined precinct of access, and they all just bounce off each other in these four walls. Do you know what I mean? And they can't hide from each other. They don't want to hide from each other. They've all fired each other. They've all sued each other. They've all worked for each other, and it's just a gift. I mean, they slag each other off all the time. All you have to do is sort of be in it, and it all just happens. You don't have to kind of sort of like imagine anything. It's just like turn the camera on point. It's all there. So, see, I mean, this season is going to be amazing because there's 14 drivers out of contract this year, so it's going to be chaos. They call it the silly season, and it started obviously with Lewis yesterday, which was a bit of a bombshell, which is great because we're also making the Lewis documentary for Apple. So we're approaching that from two perspectives. So, something like Six Nations is different because you've got the camps and they're very, very siloed and unique, and they only cross over on match day. So that's a slightly different challenge. But you'd be surprised. The PGA and the tennis tour, they're also sort of these tight-knit communities that just move around from tournament to tournament. And that, if you go into the Players' Lounge at the Australian Open, it looks very much, the building's different, but the same characters are sitting there that sit in the Players' Lounge at Wimbledon, or an ATP event. So it's the same sort of precincts, it's the same sort of atmosphere, same players, same coaches, same physios, and you recognize them all pretty quickly. And they just slouch around waiting for something to happen. It's really funny, actually. Then they train, then they come back, then they play, then they come back, then they go home. So they're not dissimilar. And the golf thing, the tour is not dissimilar again. I mean, they don't all play exactly the same matches, but a lot of them do play the same matches, tournaments. So you can kind of predict where they're going to be, which player they're going to be there. They bounce off each other. It's slightly more fluid, but slightly different type of show, but not radically. I mean, all the shows are different, obviously, because the sports are all emphatically different. But there are only a few exceptions. I mean, we're doing the Tour de France again this year, which I love, and that's again, it's the same. We follow the same. We're not actually following slightly different teams, but following some of the same teams. And they're cooped up on their buses. They go out, they ride, they eat. You can sort of know where they're going to be subject to their route and how they're going to bounce off each other. It's fantastic.
You said earlier that you think that the access documentary in sport will continue to be popular and successful. It feels like we've had a golden age, of which you've been very much a part of, building that golden age. But is there a sense or a potential that the bar has been raised so high already with fantastic access, with the great stories that have evolved, and that the question is, well, what's next? How does this process still maintain its momentum?
It's a really, really interesting question, and one that we put a lot of thought into because it is going to evolve, I think, and we want to be at the front of that evolution. So I think inevitably, if I'm really honest, I think you'll see a closer alignment of athletes and entertainment companies in a more strategic way. Listen, lots of athletes have already got their own production companies. Do you know what I mean? But a lot of them don't really know how to do it, if I'm really frank. And I think the means of consumption will change. I think that AI will change how quickly shows can be turned around on streamers. And I think you'll probably get a closer alignment of the live and the behind the scenes. So it'll become a more confluent sort of experience. And I think that we're certainly looking at having a deeper relationships with athletes above and beyond just doing a drive to survive or a full swing. So that's the kind of, I think that'll be how it develops. It's early days, but I think that's sort of how it's going to develop. Because I think sports and entertainment are obviously eternal. I mean, then neither thing is going to go away anytime soon. So how the two things integrate with each other, I think, is going to get more complicated and more exciting, I think. I don't think they're going to go further apart from each other. I don't think you're going to see, I think, as I said, like I said earlier, I think the genie's out of the bottle. I don't see a world in which young athletes aren't going to want to have an enhanced visibility outside of the stuff they do on the pitch. Yeah, so in whatever shape or form that ends up taking. But I think, they're aware of their own power, and I think they want to capitalize on that. And I think it's just got to be done the right way. I think listen, there's definitely too many bad sports documentaries being made, if you want my opinion. There's too much stuff out there which maybe doesn't warrant the exercise, but that's subjective, and we've all been guilty of that to some extent. But I don't think it means more biodocs necessarily. I think it may be a bit more, I don't know, complicated than that.
Well, finally, I always like to finish with a fun question about media. So, if you found yourself on location away from home, which film, book, TV box set, and album would you choose to keep you company on your travels?
I can only have one.
Only have one.
It would either have to be the collective works of Shakespeare because I've never read them, and I'm really embarrassed that I've never read any much Shakespeare. So I think I'd either take the time to do something like that, or I would take a really great TV show. And I think the one TV show that I could probably watch over and over again, and I probably will watch again at some point, although I'm probably going to wait a little bit, is probably the entire collection of Breaking Bad because I thought that probably was about as good as it got when it came to TV. It's not perfect, but nothing is. But it's a pretty damn good TV show. Or The Sopranos, which I've never watched. One of those two. Maybe The Sopranos, because maybe it should be something new.
Well, I'm a big Breaking Bad fan, so I would encourage Breaking Bad. What about a 70s film if you said that 70s films were a passion? If you had to pick one from one of those.
That's a tough one. I've got so many favorites, Godfather 2, Dog Day Afternoon, The Conversation, so many great movies made in that period. Bullet, I mean, I love all those movies so much. That's a tough one. Maybe Serpico. That's one of my favorite films of all time.
Very good. Well, James, thanks for being a guest on the podcast. It's been a fascinating chat, and I will continue to watch you move from success to success with Box to Box.
Many thanks. Let's hope so. Thanks for having me.